Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are in the world. Today's guest, he's a holistic coach who integrates various modalities, mind and body. Jon Carlisle, he attended one of my courses years ago, and I'm very, very privileged to have him on the show. And Jon's the sort of person, when you go in the room, he tends to be the most intelligent person in the room. He's really a deep thinker who has a modern day philosopher, I would call it, Jon. You really understand the world and understand people in an amazing way. And, certainly you never cease to amaze me in our conversations we've had in the past. And I keep an eye on what you do. For the people who are watching today, they're probably wondering what's a holistic coach. And I don't think any child's going to do the work you do justice. It's just to give an idea that you uncover every stone to help people, use mind and body, and an array of techniques. But tell us a bit about what you do, Jon. What does your work entail? In a nutshell, so to speak.
Yeah. Hi, Jimmy. Thanks for that glowing introduction. That's what. Thank you. What do I do? Well, it depends on what people come to me with. So this is why I like having several modalities under my belt, as it were. I like having a bag of tools to choose from rather than just one. So somebody might come in with self-esteem problems, which is a pretty common problem to have in modern day society. I might use NLP or talking sessions to deal with that. They may come with a physical ailment. They may have suffered a trauma. Trauma is an interesting one because you can sometimes use a bit of both. Talking session mixed in with something a bit more physical, like sometimes even a gentle massage would help people with trauma, because they can relearn that touch can be a pleasant thing. It can be a healing, nurturing experience. Also listen to the language people use and how they see the world. And if you can encourage or point out a few ways where they may contribute to their own situation. Also cold laser. So on the physical level again, if somebody has a physical problem, we can treat that. Cold laser isn't like a hot laser. It doesn't heat anything up. It just delivers messages to damaged cells struggling to communicate with the brain properly because of the trauma, or the injury, or inflammation or illness. Very, very useful thing. My favourite one of that was a lady who came with one replaced knee and the other one on the way to being replaced. Took about 5 minutes to get up the staircase, going one step at a time like this. On the second session, she walked up, and on the third session, she left to stick at home. And as far as I know, this was 18 months ago, as far as I remember, and as far as I know, she's still got her own knee. She didn't have it replaced. She had about 4 sessions with the cold laser. Very, very useful bit of kit. Yeah.
That's really interesting stuff. Yeah, no, that's.
But mostly
that's fascinating stuff.
Sorry, Jimmy.
No, that's really interesting stuff. Yeah, it's fascinating. Definitely.
But mostly it's about people with spiritual, emotional, psychological issues that are holding them back. That's really the main objective in anything we do. It's just enjoying their life better without that pain or discomfort. So it's all about trying to enhance life a bit, yeah. Enhance the human experience, deepen their awareness, mindfulness, maybe suggest a new way of looking at it if they like that kind of thing. I don't tell people what to do. I don't know what they should think. I leave it up to them, but I can make suggestions. Perhaps you could look at it like this, and they'll either go, "Oh yeah, I like that," and I don't even mind. People may reject a suggestion. It doesn't matter. Hearing the wrong idea can actually point you to the right idea anyway. So the result is still positive. If you say maybe it's like this, and they say, "Oh no, it's not that. It's this." it still prompts them to find their own correct answer for them.
Definitely, yeah.
Either way, it's a win-win situation. So I always tell people, don't worry if I'm wrong, tell me, because you will see the right thing by hearing the wrong thing.
That's really interesting stuff, and it's quite intuitive, John. From my point of view, I can see you're quite intuitive, and I'm wondering, John, if you're a really well-travelled person. I believe at one point you sort of were a monk, or you went to, and I wonder how much of that has influenced the work that you do. I think that for me, in my opinion, a lot of people, they tend to work through the textbook a lot, and I'm not sort of advising how people should and shouldn't work. It's entirely up to them. But regardless of which modalities you do, whether it be NLP, whether you do CBT, or whatever you do, I think for me, the important thing is about creating experiences for people to change. I think people can be very didactic, and we know that the way the brain works is quite complex in one sense. And I think for me, experiences are what change people. But in terms of yourself, how much of an influence? Do you also play music as well? You're a musician too. How much of that has influenced the work that you do, John? Your sort of travels, spending time being a monk, that sort of introspection that we don't really do a lot of these days. We don't encourage it anyway.
That's true. It's a good question, and I think, to be honest, most of my traveling experience and life experience influences my work even more than the techniques I may have learned. If we got a moment for a quick story, a lady came to me for a Reiki taster at a festival, and she was 50-something years old, maybe 55, and she said she'd just finished, or was just about to finish training as a counsellor, but she was nervous about going into the job. I said, "Oh, how come?" She said, "Well, I've got these techniques and these methods that I've learned, but what if I can't put them into practice?" So I said, "Well, hold on a second." And I did actually get a flashback immediately to the temple where I met a Korean Zen Buddhist monk who was a fantastic guy, but the best people I've ever met. And he talked about rules. He said, "You guys here in Thailand, you don't eat in the afternoon, right?" We said, "No." "Nor in the evening?" "No." "You only eat in the morning?" "Yes." He said, "Do you get hungry in the evening?" And with that one little sentence, he cut through a lot of rubbish. Like, he said, "Why is it?" And then they said, "Well, yeah, but the Buddha said don't eat at the wrong time." He said, "Yeah, what time is that?" "Did the Buddha have a watch 2,500 years ago?" "I don't think so." He said, "Maybe the Buddha meant don't eat when you're not hungry. Don't eat when you're just lazy and bored and you've got nothing to do. Things. Or if somebody offers you food and you're already full, but you're afraid of offending them, so you eat the food that they've offered. Maybe." Then he said about, he wound them up a little bit. He had a great sense of humor. He said, "So you guys don't go to Coco?" Or I came across it. "No, but I do." And they said, "Why would you go there as a monk?" He said, "Why would you not? The people working, the young women who work in these places, these are human beings too. Society looks down on them. They work in a bar. Strip dances. Society looks down on them. Do you not think they have problems? Why do you think they're working in a bar like that? You don't think they're having a happy life?" And so they just decided to throw that away and go and work in a bar. They're working there because they have probably bigger problems than the people who come to the temple. So if they're too shy to come to the temple because people are looking down on them, I go to them. And they're very happy. I go in, I have a cup of coffee, and they come and tell me their problem while I'm sitting there. "What do you think I go for?"
Projecting me down.
So I told this story because he said, if we are priests, and what does a priest or a monk do? He says to the community around him, "I'm here. If you have a trouble, a problem, you don't know where to turn, I will try to help you." Now, when you promise that to a community, you have a duty to fulfill it. So if a young, beautiful woman, he said, "I have the same rules as you," but if a young, beautiful woman comes running into the temple, but she's crying and screaming because some terrible, terrible things happened, maybe her father died, maybe her baby died, something really awful, As a human being, what's the first thing you have to do? Comfort, if she needs that. You can't stand there like a statue for your rules. You can't touch it before the mat. Just sit down and we'll talk. Doesn't work. Before you're a monk. So I told this lady that who just about to qualify as a counsellor. She said, "Right. So the relevance being," I said, "Well, you've got 50-something years of life experience behind you. And you've learned this technique, but you let the technique absorb into who you are and what you do. You don't try and become the technique. You are you are unique. You have your qualities, your insight, your intelligence, wisdom, things you learn. You put that into the technique. You don't put the technique into what you are."
That's right, John.
That will serve your clients far more than just rigidly sticking to a framework. There are therapists who do that, but they tend to be insecure themselves, I think.
I think that for me, I've often thought that one of the biggest reasons for burnout in therapists and coaches is that they sort of take the high ground of the all-powerful, mighty one. And for me, I think that the brain's got trillions of cells, 86.4 billion neurons. If any therapist, they can change the structure of someone's brain just by saying a structure, then they're likely to burn themselves out. Because in the end, it's through experiences that we change, and the brain is malleable. We know that now. And for me, whilst I'm not suggesting that didactic therapies, they do have their place. I think they are useful, but I think the creativity, I think what you say is really important to emphasize. And I think the struggle is too, John, is that the world's a different place than what it used to be. And rightly or wrongly, there's a lot of things that have happened in the last 20, 30 years. And I remember once watching a video with one of my, I call him a mentor. Maybe a mentor is, I'd call him a mentor, someone who I've sort of done a lot of training under, who had done a lot of training under Milton Erickson. I never met Milton Erickson, he pass away by the time I come and see him, but Jeff Zeig, who set up the Foundation Arizona, who'd been very close to Milton Erickson. One time I was doing a course with him, and he was showing us a video of the genius Satir, who obviously NLP had modeled. But she was like a larger-than-life character. She was quite tactile. She was really, really tactile. She'd sort of, and that was quite symbolic. And I'm not suggesting that people, when they're doing therapy, become tactile, stick within the boundaries of their remit. Sure. But equally, I think that some of the stuff that, and I remember one time I watched this video, and someone had commented who'd sort of only recently done training and gone through the academic road, and she was quite bewildered that Virginia Satir had sort of held a young person's hand, and it was kind of quite symbolic because this person was struggling, John, with an issue which I won't go into, but the video showed her holding his hands. It was almost like a symbolic gesture. When you see a couple get married and they gaze in each other's eyes and through whatever, it was almost like a symbolic gesture that this young man would stick to that new behavior, and she sort of reaching, and this person was kind of bewildered that holding his hand. It's like, well, I think that the moral of the story is that it depends really, and I think that for me, that's gone out of it now, rules and regulations, and I'm not implying that that should come back into it. It's not saying people should do that if it's not in their remit, but I think that there is a time and place for it, and I really do believe that it is key. And I'll give you a quick example, John. Years ago, when I was working in the care home industry, I was doing education in care home, and I'd been working with someone who, in education for like 5 or 6 years, and she was quite a troublesome person, and we'd worked together for the best part of 5 or 6 years, and I was delivering education to her, and she'd sort of completed GCSE, and when I first started working with her, and I'm not saying her success was down to me, but she had a good team around her, and I'd sort of bring her out to do sports and go to the track and play sports, and also underpin a lot of key skills. And she'd gone and done her GCSE and other stuff, and it got to a point where she was, ready to move on and gain independence. And on the last session, she ran up to me and sort of wrote me a card and thanked me for all the work I'd done for her. And she reached out to give me a hug. And I thought, at that point, I obliged. And afterwards, there was a member of staff that said to me, "You shouldn't have done that." I said, "Why?" And you got a side hug policy. And I said, "Are you out of your mind? If I'm going to hug someone, I'll do it. I won't do it at all." And there's no damn case history here of any sexualized behavior. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm not going to be daft enough to do that if there's a policy in place, and I wouldn't do that. But you're talking context dependent, and the world has gotten mad, I think, John, where people are afraid and they're stifled. We're human beings. And I think you take out the therapist, the coach. What else have you got? And I thought to myself, you know what? You need a reality check. And I tell it like it is. And I said, it's gone mad. If we get to the point in the world where we're too afraid to step out of the comfort zone, what do you? And you make that point really, really good there, John. I think that for me, coaches and therapists need to really use a bit of common sense, because I think the damage it would have done in the damage it would have done in sort of turning away would have been far greater than
exactly.
But equally, each policy is independent, so I wouldn't advise people go out and do. Obviously, understand the person you're working with, but you sort of you have a risk assessment, but then you also, as well as that risk assessment, in your own mind, I'm not going to breach the risk assessment, but also in saying that you've got to have an additional common sense risk assessment too, going forward. But that's another story for another day. But yeah.
Sorry, Jimmy. I think if one trusts one's own integrity as well.
Yes, that's a good point.
We're not allowed to do that anymore. Like if there are clients who at the end of a session I'll give a hug and they say thank you very much. Sometimes they just want to. It's their way of saying thank you. They really appreciate the session, and they'll give you a hug, and it's a bit of human warmth. What the hell's wrong with that?
Yeah. No, that's a great point.
And they leave, and I know that that's just a bit of support. It's not going to be, and it's not intended to be anything else other than well done or thank you or you're welcome, or that's all it is. So if you've got your own integrity and you can trust that, the rules should be guidelines to stop untoward situations arising. But if people are encouraged to use their own integrity, trust their own intuition. If I thought a client was hugging me because he or she had some kind of intention towards me, or then I'd back away a bit and say, look, that's not appropriate. So it's just so simple. This whole thing is so simple. I can't believe it's become such an issue in the therapy world these days. But you're right, it has.
And it's also in the coaching world too. Even in the coaching world too. I think that and I think rightly to a point, because there's been a lot of things that have gone on in the last few years that have been uncovered anyway that sort of show. But I think that there's sort of that fine line, and you see it even in the sports coaching world too, where coaches. And I think what you said is really important there. The integrity and the intention behind it. If someone's sort of reaching out to give you a big hug and they're getting sexual gratification from that, obviously
it might be a bit uncomfortable, but
precisely if the case usually supports that. But I think that and that's sort of, I think the reason to bring that up is from a coaching point of view, from the therapist point of view. It's sort of what you mentioned earlier about the counsellor, where they're so by the book.
Yeah.
I think, in my opinion, they have to be if they're a member of an organisation or if they're part of a body that suggests they have to work in a practical way. But for me, one of the I have a science base too. I've studied a lot of areas of science, and I think it has its place. I'm sort of on two extremes of the science base, the spiritual base, and somewhere in the middle. But I think for me, is sort of choosing your mom as a coach, John, sort of choosing him as a therapist, sometimes backing your intuition. And I think that's what you do really, really well. I think it's also about the intuition, because if you sort of get too didactic, too research-based, and you don't use that power of that your own unconscious mind, then you lose an opportunity. And I make a point when I teach courses, as you know, I ask people when I teach in courses, okay, close the books, because if you're looking at the book, you're missing out on the bigger picture. And people get withdrawal symptoms, John. They're on a course and they just want to have that book in front of them and follow me as a trainer. And is he doing this? Is he doing that? I'm like, put the book away. Just, it's like watching a film, and absorb yourself in the film. And if you sort of consciously focusing on the book, that sort of 5 to 9 piece of information that you consciously can focus on is going there. And you're missing out the unconscious experience and really absorb yourself. But I think that's another story for another day. But I will certainly share sentiments there, which is key. You mentioned self-esteem, John. Why do you think that people, and I agree with that, I think a lot of people these days seem to have issues around self-esteem, and I have my own thoughts on that. I think it's multifactorial. But why do you think that this day and age, John, people are coming along with issues around self-esteem? What have you any uncovered, any findings? Or
I don't know if the numbers that come forward now are because more people suffer these problems, or because they're just more able to talk about it, whereas in the past, especially in Britain, the old stiff upper lip thing, keep calm and carry on kind of mentality, which sort of worked on the surface, but underneath there are all sorts of pressures building that could break through that fragile crust. And I think there was some pretty appalling behaviour used to go on as a result of non-resolved self-esteem issues, because people who are content with themselves, and people who can love themselves as well as other people and treat themselves kindly, tend to treat others kindly. And if you've got an unresolved self-esteem issue, I mean, I don't need to tell you this, but that can manifest in all kinds of very strange and sometimes very destructive behavior, either self-destructive or destructive to others. And it can be simply a backlash against a comment. Maybe somebody make a comment that hits a little belief that's lodged there in the subconscious. And then suddenly the conscious mind doesn't want to believe it, but the conscious mind does, the subconscious mind does. And so this conflict starts up. It's very uncomfortable, and people may even physically lash out and punch somebody, if not simply verbally. They may say something horrible as a result of some throwaway comment that somebody's made. So the very simple example of that would be if a kid's born, a young boy, and his mum and dad make him feel stupid. They may not mean to even. They may be just joking or teasing. But from 0 to 7, the imprinting age of human development, every little signal that goes in goes deep at that age. So they may make some jokes and make him feel a bit silly, and he grows up a very intelligent young man, but with a subconscious belief that he's a bit stupid, or that he's a fraud, that he's, the intelligence he displays might not be genuine, which is, of course, it's nonsense. But if the subconscious believes that, it's the subconscious that's pulling the strings. As I mentioned when I was writing, my dear friend Ewan came up with this great phrase: the subconscious is the puppeteer for the conscious puppet. So the subconscious is, with its beliefs, as Bob Proctor calls them, as paradigm, this collection of beliefs that call the shots in your behavior, that influence your behavior, predict your, that establishes your behavior patterns to confirm its own beliefs. So if somebody says, oh, you're a bit stupid, or that was stupid or something, if you've got a good self-esteem and a good picture of yourself, you're going to laugh at that as a joke, or you're going to brush it off if it was meant seriously. But to somebody who's had that issue burning away inside them all their life, that I'm not very clever, they could respond in a way they may not actually want to respond, but they could verbally lash out or even physically lash out in retaliation from some really quite innocuous comment.
That's a really interesting point you make there, John. The reason I think that's really interesting too is that I find, in my experience, that aggression is manifested in different ways, and I think that certainly, and this may sound like a generalization, I think that men generally physically manifest aggression, and women tend to be more passive aggression, more passive. And obviously, it's generalization, every individual is different. But if you were to get a spectrum, I would say that passive aggression goes on more in females, and men tends to be more physical aggression.
Probably in the general sense.
Equally both is aggression. And I think for me, there's a sort of recurring theme. And I think that if we sort of look at a bottle, so to speak, it's almost like, in my experience, now women, men, children all have their own stuff that's going on. But I tend to find that men are less likely to open up about what's going on inside. And like a bottle of fizzy pop, generally speaking, you see that physical aggression manifest itself, not just physically in fighting, or it could be looking for these external coping mechanisms, whatever they might be, or just suffering in silence. And I think for me, John, I'm interested to see what your take is on it. Years ago, I was watching The Simpsons, ironically enough, and Homer Simpson, it was Christmas time, and he promised the family all these presents, and he had this job. And I tell the story loosely because it's been such a long while, but it really resonated in terms of, he promised the family all these toys and these treats, and Christmas was going to be a special one, but he was told he was going to be made redundant, and he couldn't fulfill that promise. And this is a recurring theme on that sort of program, this sort of failure of this man to integrate in society as we know it. And he had this trait, this behavioral trait that didn't lend itself really well in modern society. He struggled to keep a job and to hold the family down. And I thought, whilst it was, intended to be lighthearted, I thought there's a serious side to that sort of responsibility, whichever way you want to look at it, that's put upon an individual who there's suffering going on there. And I sort of, quite introspective as well, and think there's so many people out there that have got this big responsibility. And in one sense that, like the media, I think that the media, it doesn't portray that person really, really well. And it's like, well, here's someone who's suffering. It's a serious issue, which is put in a lighthearted way, and obviously it's just a lighthearted program. But there's some truth in that, John. There really is. And I think, in my opinion, there's a lot of men who are suffering in silence, and they really are struggling because society's changed a considerable great deal in the last however many years. And the job for life doesn't really exist a great deal anymore. The structure of society has changed significantly as well. You could argue that, hypothesize that, that men need to feel needed to a point, and through society's changes, they probably aren't as needed in one sense as they used to be. And it's almost like you're seeing this type of person who is suffering in silence, the Homer Simpson type
It's
situation.
interesting. I think I absolutely get the picture of what you're talking about there. I see that too, and the pressure you mentioned, because well, there's a couple of things underpinning all this. Has been a big increase, perhaps, in the use of judgmentalism when people are looking at issues. They don't try to fix problems or solutions. They just go in and look for someone to blame and someone to shout at and someone to insult, rather than finding out how that situation arose or why that person may be doing what they're doing. That and the celebrity culture, the two things are actually intertwined. Also the pressure, that's a really interesting point. Quite rightly, there's been a big push in the last few years to get awareness or to increase awareness of how women compare themselves to these ridiculous photoshopped images that they see on billboards and in magazines and even on TV, which are just impossible standards for most of us to achieve without the aid of technology and photo suite.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
And yet, even though a woman looking at some, for want of a better word, perfect image of a model and wants to be the same, and maybe she's got a few extra inches here and there around her tummy or something like that, she'll start worrying about that. Whereas actually most people do have a little extra bit somewhere, or we're not perfect, thank goodness we're not perfect. But they're kind of forced to compare themselves to these images, and it's absolutely wrong. And I'm quite happy to help people deal with that and see through that nonsense so it doesn't affect them anymore. But men are also under a similar pressure. In fact, look on places like Facebook, and I mean, a lot of the time it's in fun, but some of the jokes that come out, a real man has to do this, a real man has to do that. And you think, okay, but then some of them seem to contradict each other. Like, a real man is not afraid to show his feelings, but a real man will also stand and hide his feelings when faced with danger. He's not allowed to look scared. He may be absolutely terrified, but he's not allowed to look it. I think possibly it's a little easier now to admit that you're scared, for example, but there's still a hangover from previous generations where a man he can feel fear, but he's not to show it. And he can worry, but he's not to show it. He can feel hurt. Men can feel hurt every bit as much as women can. Their egos can be battered and bruised just like a woman's can. And some of these ideals that are put out there, but what the ideal man should be, are pretty unrealistic as well. Because we are flawed. Every human being is a flawed individual. But a lot of the time, those flaws are what make us interesting. Not that they don't make us anything less of a human. They actually make us interesting.
And if you take those flaws, sorry, John, if you take those flaws and then you sort of overlay that with like shaming language as well, and you see precisely, and like even as young as say, I mean, I was sort of on the train one time down to London, and there was a couple behind me, and they had a couple of young children, and I'm sort of doing some work and plodding on, and a cup of coffee as you do, and they, they're two young children, a little boy, and he was sort of like little boys do, moving around and whatever else, and he's sort of fallen and started crying, and I heard them say, like shaming him for crying, saying, boys shouldn't cry. And me being the big mouth that I am, I probably shouldn't have turned around, especially when the guy was about 6'12" and stuff like that. But I've got this tendency to butt in where I'm probably not welcome to butt in. I said, no, actually, you know what? If he wants to cry, I suggest that let him cry. And they're like looking bewildered. Who the hell are you? And as you do. And I said, well, I know a little bit about people. I've been studying people for about the last 20-something years or so, and I'm pretty sure that that's telling a young person to bottle their feelings is not a good thing. And I think for me, it's like, okay, that's where it begins. It's like, okay, he's fallen down, he's crying, and what's wrong with soothing and the parents saying, okay, it's okay to cry. It's an automatic reaction. It's a biological reaction, rather than saying, well, because then you start building a schema, an association, and then if something else happens, I better not cry, I'll hold it in.
Exactly.
That's going to go somewhere, and that's going to manifest itself in some way, whichever sort of theory you have. But irrespective, of what theory one has, it can't be good seeing. And I think that where do you draw the line then? And then you go through life, and life is tough. Life isn't easy. Life. We all get hits in life.
Sure.
And I think that whenever we get these sort of hits that hit us in life, people feel afraid to express themselves. Like you said, it's almost a contradictory message that's sent out there. A real man does this, a real man does that, a real person does whatever. Now, what is this sort of abstract concept of a real anybody?
Yeah, exactly.
It just doesn't make any sense, really, in one sense. But what I would say for sure, opening up has got to be a good thing. And, the stats are high, it's frightening. And I'm not saying by opening up that the stats for male suicide is going to go down or anything like that. And I'm not saying that this you know, I'm not sort of comparing the female and male stats, and that's another story for another day. But the point being that people can do their own math. The stats are high, and that's not putting that, you know, it's not causal to people not being told to express themselves. But certainly there could be some sort of correlation behind someone.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, bottling yourself up and that sort of thing. And how many people out there too afraid to speak and okay, you know, I feel like a failure. I've made this mistake. I've done this. It's okay. You're only human.
Exactly.
You're going to mess up. And for me, when I work with people in therapy and I tell them, you know what, and they come along, I feel like a failure, I've screwed up, I let people down. And hang on, it's two to tango. You've not let anyone down.
No.
Their expectation of you has been equally.
The expectations.
Precisely. Yes. And it comes back to what you said earlier before. I think it's really important expectations people have. But I think that, you know, a dialogue is really important, encouraging communication. And I really think that, you know, we've made a lot of ground and headway on that, but we're still light years from where we need to be.
There's a way to go. Sure.
I think so, for sure. We sort of bring this to your book, John. I want to talk about the book you've written now. Tell us a bit about the book you've put together and yeah.
The book, it's called Meanderings. It does actually cover quite a few of the things we've just been talking about, which is I'm happy to be reminded of that. So
yeah.
I haven't actually read it recently, but Meandering. I set off from the UK aged 18. I actually wanted to be a policeman, and I looked in the mirror, and I think my brother actually said to me, you know, you don't know a lot about the world. And I looked in the mirror and I thought, that's true, I don't, you know. So I thought, you can't be a policeman when you're still like not like out of school, high school. So I decided to go and see something, but I'd always known I was going to travel as well. It wasn't a surprise to me to suddenly have that idea. So I went off and it took 9 years to do a lap of the globe, but I didn't know it was going to take 9 years. But
Wow.
I did come back a couple of times from Europe and from Israel and then from Asia. But when I'd gone out and come back, it just didn't feel complete, didn't feel finished. So until I'd gone right round, then I thought, okay, I can stop a bit. But then, of course, I realized I didn't actually stop traveling at all. I'm still traveling now. I landed back in the UK 1989, I think it was. And I haven't stopped traveling since that day, actually. And so because the subtitle of the book is The Traveling State of Mind. And I didn't want to just write a travel log. You know, I went to this place, that place, and the other place. So the things I saw when I was in these places, the experiences I encountered, some were really beautiful ones, some were more traumatic ones or sad, but they all taught me something. And so I wanted to put that down as much as where it was. It was what it was, not just where it was, and what it made me observe about the place and myself. So there's a two-way observation going. And I should stress that if anyone else goes to these places that I've been to, which nowadays Thailand is a much more easily reachable, popular destination as a holiday destination. When I went, it was still a bit sort of out there and far away. But I got an impression of that place, which will be totally different to somebody else's impression. So I encourage people to say, here was my impression. Now you go and get your own impressions, because it's you'll experience different things to me. Or maybe not, maybe you experience the same. Maybe you'll have a similar experience, maybe a completely different experience, a completely different view of the place. So I only write about what I saw, what I experienced. I don't say it's what everybody will see. But the state of mind to go there with that thinking is what's healthy, because I've met people who've traveled far more than me. I haven't been to Africa, I haven't been to South America yet. Russia, there's a whole load of places I haven't been yet. Just because I did a lap, it doesn't mean I went everywhere, you know. So, but I've met people who've been to far more countries than me, but they seem to have seen nothing.
Yeah.
Because they don't go with that state of mind of let's see what happens next. And the willingness to absorb through osmosis. When I was teaching, long after my travels, I was teaching in Sweden, and there were two teachers standing in the corridor, and I had to walk between them. And I ducked my head down to go between them, to walk past them. They started laughing. They said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Bowing my head to walk between you." And they said, "Why?" I said, "I would have felt disrespectful because you were talking. I would have felt disrespectful cutting your view as I walked past you." And they looked at me, and I said, "I lived in Thailand for 4 years." And it was still, like 20-something years later, it was still, I'd still got that in there, that if two people are talking, you don't interrupt them. Even if you're just walking by, you duck your head down. It's a respectful gesture to be polite, and it's still there. I can't sit cross-legged with my foot pointing at someone, the bottom of my foot pointing at someone. I still can't do that. I feel like I'm really insulting them. I have to position myself so my feet are pointing away from them if I'm sitting in that way. That's from Thailand as well, because in Thailand, the head being the temple of the body, the foot's the lowest part.
Yes,
if there's a book on the floor, I can't step over it. I feel really bad stepping over it.
Yeah.
Because book is knowledge. And they say if you put your foot in Thailand, if you put your foot over the book, you're disrespecting the knowledge in the book.
Ah, okay, interesting stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's really, it's fascinating stuff. And I think it's really important when you do travel. I think that, at least in my world, in my mind, that, you know, getting amongst the locals, and I think a lot of time what happens, people travel and it's like a checklist. I've been here, I've been there, and when I go somewhere, they'll go to people of the same culture, and I think sometimes you sort of miss a trick. You know, I like to sort of spend time with the locals if possible and learn about the place.
And a bit of the language. Yeah. I
mean, you mentioned Thailand. When you mentioned Thailand there, just sort of, it resonated, John, because many years ago, I had an experience in Thailand where I was talking to a monk, and we're having this conversation, as you do, and me being deep and philosophical, as one does. I'm chatting away, and I'm thinking to myself, you know what? It's quite ironic, really. I had this sort of moment where, you know, the sort of epiphanies you get, and I'm thinking, okay, things are starting to make sense here. Because this was at a point where mindfulness was making its way into the Western world predominantly. It's been around for a while. People are integrating mindfulness into their approach for a long while in the Western world. But it was really making headway. And I've been studying it and learning it for a long while then anyway. And equally, in saying that, I sort of dipped my toes in and out of the conventional psychology and neuroscience. And I just moment of introspection where I'm sort of sat there thinking, there's almost an irony where we, in the Western world, explores this sort of concept of psychology that is pretty new in one sense. It's maybe 100 or so years of age, but it's predominantly put together by, or was anyway in the past, it's changing a bit now, but in the beginning it was sort of predominantly white, Western male who didn't really know a great deal about the other philosophies. And on the other hand, things have done a bit of a full circle where now we're adopting some of these Eastern, Buddhism and mindfulness, but some of these principles are like 4,000 years of age, and I think that integrating into modern society can be quite a challenge too. So I think that there's almost like this sort of irony where you find a happy medium. And I think for me, the biggest lesson I learned on my travels was the way to integrate some of those principles in our society, and also understanding that the way we see the world in the West isn't always an accurate reflection. It's not good or bad, it is what it is. But from the point of view that the structural psychology, some of the most influential people in the world of psychology, your Freuds, your Jungs, whether you're humanistic, whether you're psychoanalytical, irrespective of what you are, in Maslow, the point being that the way these people saw the world is going to be completely different to the way someone saw the world at that point in the Thailand, in the China, in the East. And to go over there and say, okay, this is our pathology, this is the way we see the world, in my mind, can be quite limiting. And it's almost like a full circle now. We've realised that we've got to think possibility, we've got to think of new ways. But then all of a sudden, you get this sort of mindfulness coming in, and people sort of. I remember speaking to someone in America, and she was really big fan of mindfulness. And I really like mindfulness too, by the way, and use it a lot and research a lot of stuff about it. But I said to her, she's all about like being a way of life. And I said, no, it doesn't have to be a way of life. It just take what you need out of it.
Yeah.
It's impractical to think that you can adopt a 4,000-year-old principle in the world we live in. I don't make the rules. I'm saying wrong or right. But the world we live in, you've got to be at work at a certain time. You've got so long for lunch. You've got the bills to pay. And, I think it's idealistic to think people can live that way in the structure of our society. And I think for me, it's take what you want out of it. It doesn't have to be a way of life. And for some people, it might not work at this point, but not to say it won't work in the future. But equally, from our point of view, from a psychological point of view, bringing our ideologies to places around the world, irrespective of what their ideology is, for me, undermines some of the ways that people have like going, doing their business. Where for me, you go to certain cultures, it's okay. The psychiatrist is the grandparents, because they all sit together and have a big meal every evening, metaphorically speaking, because you can talk about your issues to some of the elders in the community. And I think for me, some of the issues and the labels we have for certain conditions in our world, in some societies, is seen as just common everyday problems that can be resolved in talking and dialogue. So I'm not sort of recommending people sort of take anything on board. Every individual is different. I'm not suggesting anyone take anything that I say on board, but I'm just putting it out there, for people, sort of respecting people's cultures, learning from cultures, learning why people do things, and take what you need away from it. I think for me that no modality has got all the answers. I don't think anyone's got anyone that suggests they do have all the answers. I just like, disappear sort of thing. I think you've got to take what's right for you. And I think ultimately as well, I think what you've done there, John, is really significant. Where you learn from your own experience, you learn on your journey, and I think for me, sort of finding that happy medium and going forward. The book sounds really fascinating. I was going to say, John, we're sort of mindful of time at the moment and for the interview, but in terms of people getting in touch with you, is there any way they can get in touch with you to sort of find more about what you do, to read the book, to get hold of the book?
Sure. They can, for the book, they can go to feedaread.com. That's FEEDAREAD.com, and just put in the title in the search box, Meanderings, and then there's a synopsis there and an extract, I think, from chapter 1, if I remember rightly, the extract, to see if they if it resonates with them. I'm hoping it will, because the traveling state of mind is something you can adopt, I found out, in your everyday life, even when you're not traveling geographically.
Yeah.
The openness to new experience, to new learning, to new people perhaps that you're going to meet, or surprises that might come around the corner. If you can leave your mind and your heart open to receive those things and to go with them, not to resist them. Because we were talking sometime earlier about people getting into routines. They get in one place and they get the routine going, so they don't really have to think too much, and it starts to feel like a permanence. I think people are always, I do talk about this in the book as well, that they try to make things feel permanent and feel solid. And the solidity of any even physical objects is actually an illusion that we create within our own minds, because there's more empty space in solid matter than there is actual matter. And it's only the forces between the particles that mean we can't actually put our finger through this cup. It's nothing to do with how much material there is. If you took, as a quick interesting statistic, if you took every person on the planet, every 7 billion of us, and managed to take all the empty space out from between the particles that make our bodies up and squash them all together, you can fit them in about 2 of these. The whole population of the planet would fit into about 2 of these.
Wow.
Yeah. Most of what you see is empty space, but we don't perceive that. When we look in the mirror, we don't see loads of atoms and space between these atoms. We see a solid object. That's what we perceive ourselves to be. That's what we perceive objects around us to be. And we like that. It feels kind of comfortable to have that solidity and permanence. We don't like, it's a way of avoiding change, because that's the one thing that people are most afraid of. Even change from negative to positive is still scary for people.
Yeah.
So we build these routines in a parallel way to create this illusion of permanence and stability. But if you can adopt the traveling mindset that is aware of that, I mean, I'm still aware when I pick that up, it feels solid to me. I'm not Buddha who can just see the actual reality of it. But at the same time, I do try and bear in mind that it is not actually what I'm seeing, what my conscious mind is seeing. And for events that happen, something in a heartbeat, something can happen that changes the whole direction of your life. You may have to move area. Your job may finish. Somebody could die or leave or go away, or you can get an illness. So there's all sorts of things. We never know what's happening in the next 5 minutes, never mind a month or 2 months down the line. And the traveling mindset that I try and describe in the book is about adopting that into your everyday life, that willingness to embrace the uncertainty. Because actually, once you do, and there's a chapter, I think it's chapter 3 or 4, when I'm in Bangkok, and I was just about to leave Bangkok, and I had a conversation with someone about that. And I said, because he asked me what my most important lesson had been from a year in Bangkok, and I said, doubt. Although I would use the word uncertainty these days. And he said, how do you mean? I said, well, you can't be sure of anything that's going on here. There was a subterfuge and a subtext going on all the time in your daily interactions. It's just the way their interactions are. In Thailand, speaking directly is actually quite rude. It's considered rude. And so they will speak around things, especially if it's something negative. It's a bit like lying, although they're not lying necessarily to deceive you. They're often doing it to protect you and protect your feelings. But it's difficult for us to get to grips with that, because in the West, we like to know what our problems are. We like to know if you and I were angry, we'd sit down and bash the table and shout at each other, and then we'd clear the air and go and have a beer. But they find that very strange and very difficult. So they talk around. So if something negative happens, you ask them about it, and to avoid looking at that negative thing. And then they expect you to realize what they're doing and lie back. That's how they go on. So, but then it's very difficult for the Western mind to get into that, especially when they've got a partner who's not always telling them the whole truth. Because we know from our partners what they're telling us and so on. So I said to this guy who had asked me what my most important lesson was, I said, that's it. I've learned now to live with that uncertainty. I've learned to live with that doubt. I'm comfortable with it. I don't care if there's doubt there. I'm okay. And I think that will be the most important lesson. I was 21 at the time. But I said, I think that's going to be the most important lesson I'll ever learn. Because once you've embraced that uncertainty and can live with that comfortably, doesn't matter what life throws at you, you'll deal with it. You'll find a way to deal with it.
That's a really good point, Jon. I think that, and life is uncertain. There's no guarantees for any of us. And I think for me, trying to be certain in an uncertain world is going to bring all sorts of permutations, and certainly trying to be certain in an uncertain world is going to give us a level of anxiety. That's not the only factor of anxiety, but certainly,
it's a big one.
For sure. No, I think so too. And I think it's really interesting too. I think for me, the traveling mind also is about people being comfortable being around people who've got different beliefs and values in them. And I think that people live in their solipsistic world where they're on social media, and all the people in their social media are just people who reinforce their beliefs, and all they watch on TV is reinforcing their belief. And the only social network they've got is people around them that reinforce what they believe. And whenever they go into an environment who believe something differently, they just can't handle it. And that's how we learn. And I think for me, the traveling mind and that's why you see people gravitate to people of the same culture, the same ethnic group when they sort of go traveling. So, you know, you can go to Spain and find, you know, if you're from Sweden, you might go hang around Swedish people. If you're from Italy, you might hang around Italian, English, you might hang around English people. I think for me, the idea is go there and meet the locals and learn, and you know, go to Thailand and meet the locals. And I think the value in doing that, and the value in being around people who've got different beliefs than us, is we can grow. I might not agree with someone's belief system, but I can respect that they see the world different to me, and vice versa, and see it as an opportunity to growth. I might be right, I might be wrong. I might be right at this moment, but in the future it might be something that changes. Who knows? But the point being is that I think now, to get that certainty, people are spending more and more time surrounding themselves with people who just see the world. None of us see the world in the same way precisely, but they have got these similar values and beliefs and outlook. And I think that by doing that, they sort of stunt their ability. And I think traveling mind for me is, you know, getting out there and seeing it from various perspectives and taking the time to really, you know. And for me, when you see sometimes people don't communicate and they're around people who've got different beliefs and what they have, they literally just shut it down. And they'll use shaming language, they won't entertain it. Rather than say, okay, let me listen to what this person got to say. Let me listen to what they've got to say, and then I'll make my mind up. And that's not to suggest that what the person says is going to be my new outlook, but I'm going to sort of give someone some time. What have they got to say? How do they see the world? How they got to where they are? And it's either going to be, okay, that's fine. You can carry on believing that. But equally in saying that might be okay. You might have a point there. And I think if more of us did that and more people were open to doing that, we'd sort of grow and evolve quicker as a society. Because I think we're going through a pivotal moment, you know, in the world. That's another story for another day. I truly believe that we're going through a pivotal moment where history doesn't repeat, but it certainly rhymes. And you think that the lessons of the past were enough for us to know that we're going to move forward. We've got to think big picture rather than, okay,
absolutely,
me against him or her against me, and there's got to be a more collective consciousness, I think, anyway.
The conversation you've just reminded me of, if I got time to squeeze it in.
Yeah,
there was,
sure.
Guy I worked with in London after my travels, Gus, a musician, Rastafarian from Nigeria. And we was just standing outside one afternoon in the days when I used to smoke and having a cigarette. And he looked at the sun going down. He said, oh, about an hour and a half, I'll be able to eat something. And I looked and I said, are you fasting? He said, yeah. I said, why? He said, well, it's Ramadan. I said, that's a Muslim tradition, right? He said, yeah. And you're a Rasta? He said, you don't know much about Rastafarians, do you? I said, no, I don't. You're right. Tell me. And this was fantastic. He said, our teacher, we have our spiritual teachers and we have our holy book, but they actively almost push you and force you to say, you look at every book, not just ours. You look at the Bible, you look at the Quran, you look at the Bhagavad Gita, you look at all these teachings. He said, because everybody individually will find something in those things that you think, that resonates with me, that will help me in my development. He said, so I read the Bible, I read the Quran, and I saw the fasting and why they fast and so on. I thought, yeah, that's good, I like that. So the Rastafarians can look at that from another faith entirely and say, that is a really good idea, and they can adopt it into their practice. That's what a fantastic way of looking at things.
No, it is definitely. I think so, and it resonates with me. You know, I've read many books and certainly studied many modalities, and the one thing, the place I am and have been in the last few years has been, I call myself a possibilitarian.
That's good.
It's a word not exactly, I'm not in the dictionary, but I think for me, we know too little to rule anything out, but I think we know too much to sort of say this is it. And I think in my journey, certainly it's about taking what is right for you at that point and being open to change. And I think ultimately also one way to do that is to sort of be open to dialogue. I think that's a healthy place to be, to listen to all people, whatever their religion, race, whatever they practice professionally, wherever they are in the world. I think there's a lot to learn of everybody. I think everyone you come across is an opportunity to learn something from everybody, whoever that may be. And I think when the blinkers are down and we sort of just got that tunnel vision, is when we certainly stunt our ability to evolve and go forward. But I want to thank you a lot, Jon, for coming on the show. Just to remind people that they want to get in touch with you, Jon, just sort of people want to get in touch with yourself. What's the Facebook page you've got? Any details that they can sort of get in touch?
Yeah, there's a Facebook page. There's also the Awakening Self, all one word, lowercase, the Awakening Self.life, L-I-F-E. That's my therapies work. Exactly where I'm going to be based, probably moving soon. As I told you, I was telling you earlier, my mum, 91 years old, very peacefully, thankfully, slipped away last month. And so that was the reason I'd stayed in the UK. But who knows? Maybe I'll just stay. We don't know what's happening tomorrow, as I keep trying to impress on people. So, but yeah, the Awakening Self.life. That's where my coaching and therapy work is. It was breathingspace.works. That website's still going, but the address will be out of date. The location will be out of date. And then the book, yeah, Meanderings on feedereat.com. But it's lovely to talk to you, Jimmy.
Yeah, you too, Jon. Yeah, definitely. Time certainly goes quick, for sure. It's been great to catch up, Jon. I appreciate you coming on board, and we'll keep you in touch for sure. Thank you, Jon.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jimmy. Good to see you.
You too.